I don't think that Reform UK are feeling that triumphant about what happened in Blackpool, in spite of the fact that actually it is, by quite a shot, their best and most successful by-election result.
This is the election station. You need not go anywhere else. We have got all the results, all the reaction, all the analysis for you over the course of this weekend, actually, in this context. Overnight, we have had results from 35 councils, but also the Blackpool South parliamentary by-election, which was triggered by the resignation of the MP Scott Benton. Labour have won the seat with a 26% swing from the Conservatives. Times Radio presenter Darryl Morris has been reporting from Blackpool South all night. From a rubbery-smelling gym hall to the glamour of a car park. Darryl, good morning once again.
Good morning. I think I'm now claiming the title of the Times Radio presenter who stayed up the longest for a consistent period.
Absolutely, you've won that.
Yeah, hands down, hands down. So talk us through the numbers, Darryl, and I suppose whether this was expected. I mean, this swing is verging on historic, actually, for Labour.
Yeah, it is, and undeniably that is the story of the night here, I think. The fact that Labour have won in itself is not a surprise. Chris Webb, the Labour Party candidate, was nailed on favourite to win this by-election. The story of the night is the swing to Labour, 26%. That is really significant. The third biggest swing in post-war by-election history. So says Sir John Curtis, who's been doing the rounds today. I also think it's worth us just putting it into this context of history as well. It's the fifth parliamentary by-election with a swing of over 20% from the Conservatives to Labour under this administration. Tony Blair didn't achieve that in the mid-90s, in the run-up to that sweeping landslide of 1997. So I think that's the context that you have to see it in. Now, of course, the devil is always in the detail. Turnout was low, 32%. I put that point to Chris Webb, who's the new Labour MP. He said that Blackpool South has always been a low turnout constituency. They do tend to get around 50-55% at a general election. So it isn't necessarily that surprising to see them achieve a relatively low turnout. And of course, the subplot of the night was who comes second. At the start of the night, Reform UK were buoyant. One of their senior advisors, their senior members, entered the hall, immediately said to me, I think we've done it. I think we've squeezed the Conservatives into second place. As it happens, it was close, but not enough. And if you look at that Reform UK share, 16.8% of the vote in Blackpool South overnight. That is much the same as the 17.3%, very little difference, to what UKIP, a comparable party, achieved in 2015. And I think it was quite telling, actually, that Richard Tice, the leader, arrived at the count at about 2 o'clock, slipped out the back door as that result was declared. I don't think that Reform UK are feeling that triumphant about what happened in Blackpool, in spite of the fact that actually it is, by quite a shot, their best and most successful by-election result. And just finally on that, the Conservative Party are breathing a sigh of relief. They have finished second by only just over 100 votes. That is not something to be celebrated, in the slightest for them. But psychologically, I think it's important. Hearing our colleague Carol Walker earlier describe the Tees Valley result as potentially quite symbolic. If they are able to hold on there in the same way that they have held on to second, or at least not been pipped to second in Blackpool, I think it just helps ever so slightly with the psychology of what is already a very bad night for them.
Yeah, psychology in this is so interesting, actually. And I do it's one of those things where something of a triumphant Labour Party this morning. I wonder if that changes later in the day when mayoral results start coming in as well. One of the things, Darryl, to consider, I suppose, in the context of this parliamentary by-election is the idea of timing. So we're expecting a general election at some point in the next few months. And I just wonder if that plays on people, or has played on people's minds, from those that you've kind of spoken to, from those who have been campaigning and on the doorsteps and whatever, whether there's a question of, short, medium, long term, or, and how that has influenced people's votes in this by-election.
Yeah, that is very true. And of course, we know that by-elections are, relatively speaking, kind of risk-free. They're a free shot, aren't they, for the electorate to make a point. We saw that in Rochdale a couple of weeks ago. I spent a long night there as George Galloway became the Member of Parliament for Rochdale. Clearly an expression of frustration about something from a community in Rochdale. And no doubt that tonight is driven by frustration at the incumbent. I don't think that you will meet a Labour activist or a Labour Member of Parliament who will tell you with a straight face that this is all about enthusiasm for Labour and all about enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. I just don't think that's really the way that politics works, actually, very, very often. And I think the idea of this being a change era appears to be a narrative that is set for moments like this, by-elections, local elections. Whether that gets set in a general election, of course, remains to be seen. I thought it was very interesting that a lot of the candidates really played on their local credentials in this by-election. Chris Webb made a big deal of it, as did the Conservative candidate David Jones. And Mark name escaped me at about 3 o'clock. Names left me in the hall at about 3 o'clock. Right. Mark Butcher, there he is, forgive me. Mark Butcher, very nearly bedtime. He made a really big deal of the fact that he's a local guy, quite well known, actually. And I thought it was quite interesting. I think most of the candidates were clearly looking to distance themselves from a Westminster that probably just has a bit of a funny smell about it at the moment. Doorstep after doorstep, these candidates were telling us that people were frustrated with Westminster and that campaigning locally was really the only route through for them. So all of them took that tact. And I think that is clearly present in the West Midlands, probably a little bit in the Tees Valley as well. And I think certainly so far as Conservatives are concerned, but Labour as well, really, trying to make a big deal about local credentials.
Darryl, thank you for all of your reporting overnight and this morning. And may I just read you this message from listener Kate, who speaks for us all. She simply says, Darryl is good. And
good.
I mean, I would
We've had
enhance
lots of
that.
those.
Yeah,
We've
we
had
have
lots of those
actually.
this
It's
morning.
understated, but I'll have it.
Totally brilliant. We have loved speaking to you all through the night and throughout this morning. So thank you very much, and go and get some sleep.
Thank you. I'm off to bed. Good night.
Good luck to you.
A few
Cheers,
people,
Darryl.
a few people are getting in touch saying, don't just tell us the swing of 26%, tell us the actual breakdown of votes compared to 2019. So here you go. Last night, I can't remember the exact amount, 10,000 something, tell me, that Labour got in Blackpool South, 10,000 and, look it up quickly.
Oh, gosh.
You look
Sorry.
that up while I do this. We know that the Conservatives got just over 3,000 and Reform got 3,000 as well. They were about 100 votes behind. So basically just over 10,000 votes for Labour last night in the Blackpool South by-election. In 2019, Labour got 12,557. They came second to the Conservative Scott Benton, who got 16,247. Your Googling is very slow when you're tired.
Well, can I just actually blame the results that I'm guessing?
I know, the results,
because
I
I
can't
got all
find the
percentages.
exact, I
Right,
know,
here we go, got
everyone
them
gives
now.
percentages. So,
Labour's Chris Webb secures 10,825 votes.
so that was last night, 2019. Gordon Marsden for Labour, 12,557.
So that's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Exactly. And Scott Benton for the Conservatives in 2019 got 16,247 and last night got 3,000.
218. One thing we should do at this point then is...
But there's only 32% turnout.
That's right, exactly. So let's put all of this into context with Patrick English, Director of Political Analytics at YouGov. Patrick, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, good. You can help us make sense of the numbers here, because the majority here for Chris Webb in Blackpool South is 7,607. The Conservatives with 3,218 votes, and then Reform UK 117 votes behind. But as Chloe says, the turnout is quite low in the grand scheme of things, even arguably, I think, by by-election standards. Would you agree with all of that?
Yeah, that's about right. As was sort of mentioned about in the programme, this sort of Blackpool South isn't a high turnout area anyway, so only about a third of the electorate going out to vote in a by-election is probably about what you would expect, maybe a little bit on the low side. Look, I think all sort of analysis of by-election has to take into a fact that with the question of who governs being taken off the table, which is the case for 99.9% of by-elections, many voters simply don't go out. Many voters feel they're sort of that free hit idea that they can go out and sort of register a protest vote or go for the opposition party to make sure they give the government a good kicking in a way that we don't see replicated in Westminster elections, which is why, you know, the sort of Liberal Democrats will win some outrageous seats in midterm and then fail to defend them in the actual general election. So Certainly, we need to be caveating our analysis of the by-election. I think it tells us a really good sense of what the mood among the people who are willing and are motivated to go out to vote right now currently is. And I think it gives us a good indication to suggest that the polling right now across the industry is probably pretty much about right in telling us that Labour are about 20 points ahead in expressed vote intention among Brits right now.
One thing that we are acutely aware of this morning, Patrick, as we're putting the results that we have so far into context, is that there are still a lot of results to come. Which ones are you particularly keeping an eye on to try to add more pieces to this jigsaw and to get a fuller picture of what it all means?
Yes, it's a really good point. So we haven't had all that much from the Conservative Liberal Democrat battlegrounds in the south, really. So I'm going to be looking sort of particularly around in and around Surrey and sort of other areas around London for some of those contests. Walsall is going to be very interesting for a number of reasons. Of course, there's a marginal constituency there which Labour absolutely need to be taking if they're going to have a good night on a general election. It's also another example of a local authority where Reform UK are putting up a lot of candidates, as they did in Sunderland, and indeed that was one of the stories of the early counts, was how well Reform did in Sunderland when they put a good sort of slate of candidates up. The voters seemed to get out there and back them, and it was at the expense of the Conservatives. So let's see if that is replicated again in Walsall. Nearby Dudley is a very interesting local authority. Labour, of course, launched their campaign there. So to see if Labour have managed to knock that into overall control or maybe even taken it for themselves. Then we've got the mayoralties as well. We've got the much discussed West Midlands and Tees Valley, but also the East Midlands is a very, very, very interesting mayoral region. It's brand new, but it encompasses many bellwether constituencies, many blue sort of red wall constituencies, and all these sorts of areas where Labour need to be winning in and need to be showing that they can be competitive in and can take the fight to the Conservatives in if they are going to build a parliamentary majority at the next election. So I think that's definitely one to look out for, and other areas as well throughout the Midlands, to see how Labour really is doing in some of those key matchups against the Conservatives.
Patrick, really appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Patrick English, who is Director of Political Analytics at YouGov. Just to mention then, by way of looking ahead to today and what you can expect from Times Radio, the election station. So 4 of these Metro Mayor results are expected today. It is Friday, isn't it?
It is still Friday, yeah.
Starting with Tees Valley. These timing estimates could be completely Looney Tunes, so we'll give you them anyway.
It's a rough guide.
It's a rough guide. Tees Valley at 12:30, followed by the East Midlands at 1:30, the North East at 1:30, and then York and North Yorkshire at 4 p.m. Most of the remaining council election results will be announced beginning from around 12:30 this lunchtime, and most results from the Police and Crime Commissioner elections are due between 1 and 6 p.m. And then there are more results to come tomorrow, perhaps most notably, or certainly notably, that includes the London mayoral election as well.
And West Midlands with Andy Street as well,
tomorrow.
Which Kate McCann, applicator, has been talking to us about as well, about the significance of that when we look at the kind of pressure that the Prime Minister no vote. And John interestingly says, we need a change of government now, but we also need a strong and effective opposition to hold them to account, not a one-party state. I voted for Ben Houchen, partly because he's been seen to be effective in Tees Valley, but also want to boost the moderate Tories and avoid the Conservative Party being taken over by the right-wing Trussites and Bravermans, etc. That way lies oblivion. Leave the rump of those who still think Brexit was a good idea to reform. And we've had quite a number of those messages this morning saying, actually, I kind of voted Tory slightly holding my nose because I want to make sure that the Conservative Party stays more of a centralised, moderate, centre-right party rather than, well, as he suggests there, the right-wing Trussites and Bravermans.